We welcome you to this joint webinar on Voices of Asia Pacific's Frontline Communities Experiencing Loss and Damage, being hosted by the Climate Action Network Southeast Asia, Climate Action Network South Asia, and the Global Network of Civil Society Organizations for Disaster Reduction. Climate Action Network is a global network of more than 1,500 civil society organizations in over 130 countries, driving collective and sustainable action to fight the climate crisis and to achieve social and racial justice. CAN convenes and coordinates civil society at UN climate talks and other international fora. The Global Network of Civil Society Organizations for Disaster Reduction, GNDR, is an international network of civil society organizations working to strengthen resilience, reduce risk and to reduce risk in communities worldwide. We have 1,436 members across 127 countries. In their respective roles, both CAN and GNDR influence policies and practices by amplifying the voices of people most at risk. Today's webinar is being conducted to connect local, national, and international actors in climate change, share knowledge, and harness local voices with the aim of using our collective influence for the upcoming COP27. We see this as a first step in an ongoing process to create a statement from Asia Pacific to be presented at the COP. We will begin the webinar with welcome remarks from Mrs. Farah Kabir. Mrs. Farah Kabir has been working in the field of development and research for over 2 decades. At present, she is working as the Country Director of ActionAid Bangladesh since June 2007. She has extensive experience and knowledge on development with specific focus on governance and women's issues, particularly women in politics. Recently, she has published papers on gender and climate change. She is also an active promoter of women's rights, gender equality, and child rights. She won the Nawab Ali Chaudhry National Award in 2012 for her significant contribution in women's empowerment in Bangladesh. I hand over to Mrs. Kabir for her welcome remarks.
Good afternoon, good morning, good Earth. We just celebrated the Earth Day recently. And thank you so much, Ipcc, for your kind words. And when you said 2 decades, you made me feel younger. It's over 3 decades of working in the development sector. It's wonderful to be here, and I'm really excited about the webinar today. And the webinar today is being jointly organized by CAN and GNDR. I used to be the board chair of GNDR till December of 2021. But I remain a member of the board. And this webinar will focus on loss and damage. Thank you, Sanjay. Yes, I am the co-chair of CANSA board. And most importantly, I am an activist and a feminist, and have been working on the issue of justice, particularly for those who are vulnerable. And in the last 15 years, it's been very clear that climate impacts us in a different way. Women, young people, girls and children are impacted in multiple dimensions. And the most vulnerable are in our developing countries, which is probably why the loss and damage discussion has had such difficulty taking off. And the developed countries, the Annex I countries, have been dragging their feet. Particularly, they don't want to commit any finances, or even when we look at overall commitment, we see how they're dragging their feet, because the Glasgow Climate Pact, or the Glasgow Dialogue, as we call it, from the COP26, means that we're going to have another 3 years of dialogue on loss and damage. But why? It has been established that there are issues of loss and damage. And I'm sure when we hear Hajeet Singh presenting the keynote paper, we will get better idea, because often it was said that what is loss and damage? How do you define it? Where we stand now, for us, loss and damage refers to the impacts of climate change that have not been or cannot be avoided through mitigation and adaptation efforts. Loss and damage is now considered the third pillar, besides mitigation and adaptation of climate action under the UNFCCC. Now, there are, of course, two types of loss and damage, economic and non-economic. And whenever we talk about loss and damage, our policymakers tend to talk from the economic or the infrastructure aspect. So we need to look at the social indicators of loss and damage and have this discussion. I'm looking forward to a very interesting engagement, looking forward to listening to Hajeet and all the others who will be our panelists. And as a member of both CAN and CANSA, I believe that there's much that we need to do collectively. So with these few words, welcome to the webinar. I'll invite Hajeet.
I move on to our keynote speech on loss and damage. And I would like to welcome Mr. Hajeet Singh. He is a global expert on issues of climate impacts, migration, and adaptation. He has supported countries across the world on tackling climate change, coordinating emergency response and disaster resilience programs. Hajeet is a senior advisor at Climate Action Network International and serves as Global Director, Engagement and Partnerships at the Fossil Fuel Non-Proliferation Treaty Initiative. He is a member of the United Nations Technical Expert Group on Comprehensive Risk Management under the Oslo International Mechanism for Loss and Damage. Hajeet co-founded Satat Sampada, a social enterprise that promotes sustainable environmental solutions such as organic food and farming in India and beyond. Without further delay, I hand over to Hajeet for his keynote speech.
Thank you, Ipcc, and I'm so delighted to see familiar faces and friends. Let me start with a couple of fun facts. So until a year ago, I used to work with ActionAid, and I was there for 19 years, so worked very closely with Farah, Vijay, Becky, who are or were with ActionAid. And I have been working very closely with GNDR since 2007, and I was on the board of GNDR from 2012 to 2015. And I'm really happy to see GNDR, CAN Southeast Asia, CANSA coming together. And there are so many complementarities, and I'll talk about that in a bit. So really, really happy to see this partnership, and particularly at the regional levels where the action and local levels where the action is most needed. Let me, and thank you, Farah, for setting the context and also briefly talking about loss and damage. Let me start with the Ipcc Working Group 2 report. I'll not go into details because you can find anything that you can find on Google. I don't think I should be repeating that because that's irrelevant in this context. So I would just say some top line stuff that what Ipcc has said. We know that Ipcc, being an intergovernmental organization, the words are most authoritative on science and have unfortunately confirmed our fears, something that we have been not only talking but witnessing on ground for the last several years. And we must highlight the fact that what we are facing today on ground is because of 30 years of inaction when it comes to climate policy. And that's a very important distinction of just seeing the impacts and not relating it with why it is happening. And this is also our role to really connect what Ipcc says, because what Ipcc presented as policy summary for policymakers is a negotiated document, which means it talks about findings and policy measures which have been negotiated by 200 countries, which means what it says, it's very conservative in its warning. If you actually read the technical summary, it's far more worrying for us because it really puts the facts as bare facts, telling us what the reality is and not being twisted by what policymakers the way they would like to tone down in the summary that has been presented to us. And what IPCC tells us that half of the world's population is living on the edge. And we, as this community that has been working on vulnerability, it's really alarming for us that 3.5 billion people are vulnerable to climate shocks and stresses. And already hundreds of millions of people are facing heat waves, like, coming from India, that region, we are seeing in India, Pakistan, and neighboring countries are facing that. Food supplies are already being disrupted, and we will see even more impacts in future. Economic damages, which are escalating. We are seeing natural systems collapsing, and with much more greater costs that have been there so far. And clearly, the traditionally marginalized groups, indigenous people, women, children, who have an active agency, but how constant shocks and stresses are marginalizing them. And we are seeing massive displacement and forced migration impacts on health, livelihood, and well-being. So that's the picture IPCC paints on the reality that we are facing and what's going to happen. The positive side is that IPCC Working Group 2 report, which is on adaptation, vulnerability, and impacts, also presents a blueprint telling us what needs to happen. And it also talks about that there is a narrowing window of opportunity for adaptation, and also tells us that there are limits to adaptation. It talks about both soft and hard limits to adaptation. So soft limits being finance not being provided, our governance systems are not ready, and hard limits are when sea level is rising, glaciers are melting. There is little that you can do, and when communities get displaced, you have to respond to that crisis situation. And imagine, and that's why I highlighted, this is what the negotiated summary for policymakers says. If you read technical summary, and because of the political nature of the term loss and damage, the term loss and damage with capital L and capital D has not been mentioned, but you find references to losses and damages and limits to adaptation. So that IPCC report is not connected to the policy advocacy that we are doing at the UNFCCC level, where we are demanding finance that should be channeled to communities who are facing these climate impacts. Now, in that context, as Climate Action Network, we have been working on this issue for a very long time on adaptation and loss and damage. And very recently, we concluded our annual strategy meeting and note coordinator meeting, where together we highlighted 3 issues that we are going to work on, and all really connect the context that IPCC provides and the reality that we are facing on ground. As you know, at the international level, there is no money that has been provided as support to communities who are being impacted, who are being displaced through UNFCCC. The Green Climate Fund has a very clear mandate of only providing finance for mitigation and adaptation, which means that communities who are impacted, they are left on their own. And we all know that the humanitarian aid, which is based on solidarity, has not been enough. And the number that I remember, and correct me if I'm wrong or needs to be updated, it's just about $30 billion a year of humanitarian aid that's going. And if you look at what data suggests that the impacts that we are going to be seeing in developing countries alone, it's in the range of $290 to $580 billion a year by 2030. Let me repeat, $290 to $580 billion a year by 2030 in developing countries alone. So in that context, humanitarian aid, which is most welcome, which is based on solidarity, we know it's not going to be enough. And that is the reason we as Climate Action Network, our nodes and members have been fighting for loss and damage finance for a very long time. And as part of our work, we are now coming up with a paper, and last year we made that as the litmus test, and that really helped us escalate the issue to the level where loss and damage was not even on the agenda, but we got G77 plus China, which is a group of 130 plus countries, developing countries. They made that as their demand, that a loss and damage finance facility must be established. Of course, rich countries pushed back. They know that the bill is going to rise in billions of dollars. So they instead offered Glasgow Dialogue that Farah was referring to. And we don't want that Glasgow Dialogue to be another talk shop, because we have seen that happening in 2018 when SUA Expert Dialogue was created, which led to nothing. So we have to make sure that this dialogue delivers. And in fact, on 3rd of May, we'll be doing an event where we'll talk in detail about Glasgow Dialogue. But let me share the milestones that we have set for Glasgow Dialogue. So as far as said, it's for 3 years, but we don't want to wait for 3 years. On year 1, the first milestone that Glasgow Dialogue must achieve is to establish the loss and damage finance facility, which means announcing and agreeing on the decision that such a facility must be established. And the optimal level of details that are required are already there, and you will see a number of papers coming up. Oxfam is going to be releasing a paper, as CAN. We are working with a couple of members like Christian Aid, Practical Action, and Stamp Out Poverty will be releasing a paper before the bond session, so around 3rd week of May. And there are a number of more products coming from Stockholm Environment Institute, who we work very closely with. So those details are available. And I would like to remind you that we never had all the details before establishing an institute about Green Climate Fund or the Santiago Network, or even the Bretton Woods institutions that were established decades ago. So you can never get an institution perfectly right in the first place. What you need is the established need for that institution and what that institution would do in terms of its broad function. That should be the first milestone for the Glasgow Dialogue. The second one is about then looking into modalities and function, and that should happen in the second year, where it should define. And the same thing happened with Green Climate Fund, where a transitional committee was formed to get into those details, which can happen through Glasgow Dialogue. And year 3 should result into actual operationalization, and money should start flowing to developing countries. That's how Glasgow Dialogue should be conducted, with very clear milestones, and not a talk shop which ends into something at the end of 3 years. So we are going to be putting a lot of pressure, and the first dialogue is going to happen in June. And as I said, the paper that we are going to develop is going to provide enough detail. So that's one big piece.
Can I be a little provocative, Hajeet? Sure. Why can't it be done in year 1? I mean, so, I know, but yeah, the facility, the TOR, and the modality, can it not be done in year 1, and then from year 2 the finances, and year 3 some action to be reported? Is that possible, or is that too much, too radical?
Yeah, because what rich countries said, that they don't have a mandate and they have to go back and talk to their teams and come back, and the process starts only in June. And I think if we take a decision to establish, which is there in letter and spirit, I would think that's a good start. But you're right, year 2 we can actually be far more intense in making sure that all the details that are required to set up an institution are done. And we don't have to wait for the end of year 3. In fact, year 3 beginning itself, we can start operationalization and start channeling money. And year 2, we should also look at how money is going to be mobilized. So yeah, absolutely. But at the same time, year 1, we do see that it's going to require a lot of effort from civil society and governments to reach that decision. So that's one big piece. The second one is about International Court of Justice advisory opinion that we are seeking, and I see Lagi is going to be talking much more about it, so I would not like to cover that in detail, but just to mention, and I'll let Lagi talk about it, because the leadership is from the Pacific community, civil society, governments, Vanuatu government in particular. So as Climate Action Network International, we have decided to support the leadership of the Pacific region on this very initiative, where we will be working very closely with them and do the international level coordination on how civil society should support the call coming from Vanuatu government and Pacific civil society on seeking the advisory opinion from International Court of Justice. And I'll let Lagi get into details, but we will be starting the coordination after the launch or 12th May onwards, where we will have fortnightly calls, bi-weekly calls, which you can join, and then we will together achieve that milestone. Third one, which is going to be also a lot more important and in light of Ipcc Working Group 2 report, is the global goal on adaptation. As you know, Paris Agreement does refer to global goal on adaptation, but it has not been unpacked. In fact, when I was in ActionAid, we did produce a paper in 2016 on what the global goal should entail, collectively with WWF and CARE. But because of various political reasons and agenda being full after Paris, this issue was not picked up until Africa, that has been championing this issue, brought it up again in 2019 and then 2021 to make sure that this remains a major issue. And we have now agreed on a Glasgow and Sharm el-Sheikh work program, which should lead to the global goal adaptation being set. Just very quickly, why it is important, because when we talk about mitigation, and I know some of our colleagues are from DRR community, when we say mitigation, we basically talk about emission reductions here and protecting forest from the climate parlance. We have seen that we have very clear metrics for mitigation targets. We talk about gigawatts when it comes to renewable energy, or we talk about gigatons of emissions, or we talk about temperature goal. But it's very hard to put a finger on that, on a specific number when it comes to adaptation. Adaptation is about human being resilient and how they are ready to respond to disasters. So which means it requires a very different set of metrics. And then having something at the global level is not going to be easy. Although I must mention that Sendai framework has very clear stated goals, which can be a good starting point, but there is still a lot more needs to be done when it comes to adaptation. So that discussion as part of work program is going to happen, and we as CAN would like to make sure that we make progress on this, and we don't again see it as just technical discussions not resulting into something political. So it requires technical work, but eventually it's political. And I must also mention that the global goal on adaptation has linked to temperature goal, which means that adaptation has to be scaled up. As Ipcc report said, there's a narrowing window of opportunity. And why narrowing window of opportunity? Because we have not done enough over the last 30 years. We have not supported communities. This issue of adaptation was much more highlighted in 2001. And imagine 21 years have passed and we have still not supported communities to be prepared, which means less adaptation means more loss and damage. So the continuum of mitigation, adaptation, and loss and damage really needs to be understood. So for us as CAN, all three issues are equally important. And because we are talking of grassroots and mobilizing policymakers, I must also mention very briefly about World We Want campaign that we have been running over the last 2 years, where we not only bring together the voices of communities, frontline communities who are being impacted, but also the actions that they are taking. And I do see there's a lot of convergence between what GNDR members do on ground in terms of capturing the voices. ActionAid being one organization, and many more development organizations who are both in GNDR as well as in the climate sphere working with CAN. I see so many organizations are really so rooted and grounded and working with communities. So I think bringing out those voices are important, and that's what we have also been doing as part of World We Want campaign, but really taking it to the next level. I'll just take 2 more minutes to say something on GNDR, how GNDR and CAN can work together. And let me start with the World We Want campaign. I think evidence gathering is going to be extremely important. The kind of visibility that we were able to create at COP26 in Glasgow was because we not only highlighted the voices of vulnerable communities and how their agency needs to be supported, their leadership needs to be supported, but clear policy gaps and how developing countries got together to push that agenda. So evidence gathering is going to be extremely important to drive policy change. So I see that as one area where GNDR and CAN members can come together and nodes, and especially talking about issues such as slow onset events, desertification and sea level rise and ocean acidification, really going beyond the conventional disasters that we have been working on, like drought, floods, and cyclones. So there are new challenges, and that that's what, and there are also issues of displacement that GNDR and CAN can work together. The second aspect, I think, holding consultations like these is extremely important, but we have to also take it to a lot more local level, and talk about the continuum need for disaster risk reduction and adaptation to be scaled up, and also responding to loss and damage. I think those consultations will really help bring civil society organizations together and help them connect how it's part of the same spectrum of work. The DRR and adaptation, or now loss and damage community, should not work in parallel. Third aspect, I would say, speaking to policymakers, a lot needs to be done at the national and local levels. So how we can engage and checking with policymakers who are going to these policy spaces, be it DRR related policy work or climate related, specifically on loss and damage, what positions they have and what they are going to Sharm el Sheikh with, how we can influence their positions, and how we can create policy products. So there's a lot more around policy. And last, at the COP, let's not expect that everybody needs to be at the COP. And Sharm el Sheikh is not, again, going to be easy. We also know that there are going to be civil society participant issues there. A lot needs to happen at the national level, but we have to send those voices and messages to COP, so that at this Conference of Parties, COP27, we are able to achieve the loss and damage finance facility, because that's going to help us respond to the range of impacts that we are facing. And we have to join forces to put pressure on not only rich countries who are blocking this, like the US, UK, Canada, Japan, Norway, and so on, but also make sure that our developing countries stay strong. And they have now come together, put forward the demand of establishing a finance facility. They have to make sure that they don't cut side deals. They don't get into pressure that they have to exchange it with anything else. This has to be a firm demand, and we have to make sure that developing countries also remain accountable to people. And so the pressure from our side at the national level should make sure that we achieve this outcome at COP27. I'll stop here and pass it back to Farah and Ipcc. Thank you so much.
Farah, ma'am, you are muted. Okay. We will now move on to a plenary session on on how communities are affected by loss and damage and how to deal with it. The session will be moderated by Dr. Lee Jing. Dr. Jing is the Honorary Secretary of Environmental Protection Society Malaysia and an active member of CAN Southeast Asia. Over to you, Dr. Jing.
Thank you, Ipcc, for the introduction. I'm very, very pleased to have 4 panelists in our session, and we are trying to bring our voices of the vulnerable people and connecting the context of Ipcc, as Mr. Hajeet had rightly painted, and provide the situation on the ground. So I'm very pleased to invite, first of all, Mr. Lin Lim, the manager of Safe Rivers, Sarawak, Malaysia, whose biodata we could get from the link that the organizer has posted below. So we would like to hear from her the community experience of loss and damage in Sarawak. Over to you, Ms. Lim. Thank you.
Right. Greetings from Malaysia, everybody. Thank you so much for just having us here on the platform. My name, again, as Dr. Lee Jing has mentioned, my name is Celine. I am the Managing Director from Safe Rivers. We are a civil society organization that is based in East Malaysia. And our work centralized around an area called Baram, which is at the north side of Sarawak, northeastern side of Sarawak. And the communities that we work with are indigenous to the area. And this year, Safe Rivers have just turned 10. Our core business is mainly to empower the rural or interior community in advocating for their land rights, watersheds, and rivers. So I think what I'm going to do next is I do have a slide that I have prepared. So I'm going to just share it with us while I present. you're able to see my slides.
Yes, we can.
Yes.
I'll take that as a yes. Okay. All right. I'm not so sure why I cannot do it on the presentation mode, but I think I'll just speak on this. So I thought I'll just do a little bit of an introduction of the area in which our work is focused on. So for our international friends that are with us, again, I come from a country called Malaysia. Malaysia is, again, we have both the West and also the East Malaysia, and we are based in East Malaysia. So I would love to introduce to you right now an area that is named Baram. So Baram is, if you can see, one of its highest elevation is actually 2,804. It is considered one of the higher range even in the country itself. And one of the interesting thing about this area is we do get one of the most rainfall rate annually. So this is Baram, and I thought, since I am talking about Baram, let me introduce to you one of the heart of the area, which is the Baram River. Now, the Baram River is highly and deeply significant to the indigenous communities because all our village is actually built along the Baram River. So here we have it. The Baram River goes all the way in, and this is a little bit of a Baram landscape. This is how home looks like where I come from. I am personally also an indigenous person from Lower Baram. So I thought I'll show you a little bit of my home. It is filled with pristine rainforest. We're very proud to call this home. And I thought I'll go on to the next part, which is to introduce to you some of the indigenous communities that are in Baram. So primarily, the communities that come from Baram are known as the Orang Ulu. So the Orang Ulu is a group that is made out of roughly 27 very small but ethnically diverse tribal groups. And we have groups that are Kayan, I am a Kayan, and Kenya, Penan, Saban, Kelabit, and even more. We have colorful headgears, attires, and we live in what is known as a longhouse along the riverbank. So since I'm talking about river, this is to give you an idea of how the village actually looks like in Baram. So it is usually built. Why is it called a longhouse? Because it's usually built in a neighboring room. We call it bilet, and it's usually one longhouse can have around 30 to 40 billets. So practically, the village are built all along the riverbank, and the Orang Ulu village life revolve around the river. So the next part, I also want to tell you a little bit about the reality that we are facing also in Baram. As much as Baram is richly blessed with the communities, the cultures, and the biodiversity, but we have also experienced a very stark reality when it comes to industrial activities in the area. Prominently, logging. And just to let you know, even the last 50 years, it is estimated that 89% of the rainforest in Sarawak has been heavily impacted by logging. So these are some of the industry that's happening within our area. We have the oil palm plantation, logging, and even riverbed dredging. So we just recently came back from community engagement in the area. Most of our work is located in the Upper Baram region, where again, one of the highest rainfall in the nation actually happens in that area. But it is also in that area that you get to see a lot of logging activities. So when we came back, they had just experienced a series of flash flood and floodings in the area. So as we were having conversation with the communities, it was very interesting that they brought up this kind of statement. And one of the communities actually said that a few years ago, whenever it rains, they were able to anticipate when flooding would happen and be prepared for it. Now, even when it rains 1 or 2 hours, they are not even sure whether flooding will happen, and everyone is clueless. So I'm just paraphrasing from our conversation through our community engagement, but you see that this is really the tone that is carried all around our communities. So I thought I'll just share some pictures of what's been happening even in our region. This was a case of flooding and even flash flood that has been happening in the past 2 to 3 years. And a little bit of press, just to let you know that this this has been affecting us for a while now, even more so. And yeah, I thought I'll just share just a little bit on this, and let me know if you could hear or see what's happening here.
Đặt gì đi chứ? Tung. Video. Tung người ta cái phone đó.
Yeah. So I thought I wanted to just share with you some of the situation that's happening in Baram at the moment, and the fact that in so many ways the communities are really not prepared on a lot of these drastic changes that is happening within an environment that they were very used to. We consider our indigenous communities experts in the changes in environment, experts in their environment, but to have the very expert saying that they do not know what's happening to them, and they don't even know to which capacity they should be prepared or adapting to, it really does leave a lot to ponder on. So this was something that happened in one of the communities 20 years back, nearly 20 years back. And this is a longhouse that is situated on a higher altitude, and to actually have the river, if you could see, it says here, worst flood ever in 2005. That was how high the river swelled up to, and the communities definitely were not ready for any of this situation. So I wanted to also show that as indigenous communities, their livelihood is very much tied to the land. They have their farms, and they also have their fishing. So to have all of these uncertainties looming over them, it really does strike them in their very core identity. So one of the thing that they did was to actually approach some of the community leaders and even members of parliament. They have wrote pleading after pleading and asking for help. So most of the help that the communities have been able to receive were food aid, which is definitely important, but no answers to why things were happening to them and to their environment. So as we turn to our leaders and community representative, unfortunately, some of their response looks something like this. They actually answered us and said, "What can I do about the flood?" And when we asked about solution, they actually, one of them actually mentioned, "I just asked my people to move to higher grounds." These are some of the solution the response that we have received from authority figures that supposedly have a handle over the situation. So back to back, we are where we are today, and I must say the sentiment over the communities when it comes to this unexplained flooding or is really clueless and helpless. So in a way, they really embody that vulnerability as a community that is facing drastic changes in their environment. So this vulnerable state definitely is detrimental to the communities, not just infrastructural or even economic wise, but it is to their very identity as indigenous communities, because they are so intertwined with the environment. So to have them say that they don't even know what is happening to the environment, again, it leaves us, even as the CSOs that is walking alongside the communities, also in a very disheartening state. So I also, I wanted to cover this a little bit before I end. Just as much as we were trying to grasp the situation, we together, just to let you know that Safe Rivers is a part of the CSO platform for reform. We are placed under the environmental cluster, and together with the environmental cluster, we came together and decided to actually conduct a Baram flood research effort. So it just started, we just concluded it the first round just a week ago, and we are just waiting to just tabulate the data that we're getting from the communities. Now, we are absolutely a believer in having the community as part of the research data, because they themselves, they understand their environment much more than any of us from the city or from outside will ever could. So these are some of the activities that we have done. They actually went down to 3 villages and gathered some data, and we are waiting to actually tabulate those data and results so that we are able to have at least a baseline study on what is happening in our environment or in Baram. So we are looking forward for this, but again, we are definitely in just like the very first step of trying to grasp what is happening in our communities. So for this, I end, and thank you very much, Dr. Lee Jing. I'll just pass it back to you.
Thanks, Celine. It was such a powerful presentation. How could displacement be a solution, right? And your words on embodying the vulnerability as a community, the losing of identity, not just life, property, way of life intertwined with the nature and the identity itself. It is so powerful. And I really like the connection between fact-finding as a member of a community to drive policy change. We would like to hear more from Mr. Tapas Mondal, from the chief organizer of Sundarban Jana Stramjibi Mancha. The bio notes are in the link below in the chat, talking on impact of cyclone and salinization of coastal region in India, leading to forced migration. A 5 minutes translation in English will be conducted by Ms. Roshati Das. The floor over to you, Mr. Tapas. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Basically, I am speaking in Bengali. Roshati will translate. আমি যেটা বলতে চাইছি যে সুন্দরবন মানে বাইরের মানুষের কাছে, মানে সুন্দরবনে যারা বাস করে না সেরকম মানুষের কাছে সুন্দরবন মানে অসংখ্য নদী নালা ঘেরা ম্যানগ্রোভের অরণ্য আর পৃথিবী বিখ্যাত রয়্যাল বেঙ্গল টাইগারের জায়গা, একটা প্রিয় ভ্রমণ কেন্দ্র। এর বাইরেও সুন্দরবনের একটা আলাদা পরিচয় আছে। সাধারণ মানুষ সেখানে প্রতিনিয়ত বাঘের সঙ্গে লড়াই করে এই সাইক্লোন প্রবণ অঞ্চলে বেঁচে রয়েছেন, সেই খবর বাইরের পৃথিবীর মানুষ খুব একটা বেশি রাখেন না। সে ইংরেজ রাজত্বকালে সাপদ সংকুল জঙ্গল কেটে বসতি স্থাপনের যোগ্য, চাষবাস করার যোগ্য তোলাই হোক, আর বর্তমানে একের পর এক ঘূর্ণিঝড় ও ভয়ঙ্কর বন্যার পরিস্থিতি মোকাবিলা করে নিজেদের টিকিয়ে রাখাই হোক, বা জঙ্গল থেকে রয়্যাল বেঙ্গল টাইগারের সঙ্গে যুদ্ধ করে নিজেদের জীবন জীবিকার যে কোনো উপায়ে বাঁচিয়ে রাখাই হোক। রুশাতি। Roshati, can you hear me?
Sorry, I got mute. Sorry, I am starting now. Sundarban for normal people is mainly known for mangroves, tiger, and tourism. But other than that, Sundarban has its own introduction. Other than fighting with tigers, people of Sundarban are fighting for their lives with cyclones, flood, and other natural hazards.
অর্থাৎ আমি বলতে চাইছি সুন্দরবন মানে শুধু ম্যানগ্রোভ অরণ্য নয়, ম্যানগ্রোভ সন্নিহিত অঞ্চলে যে বিপুল পরিমাণ মানুষ, সব মিলে আমাদের এখানে মানে ভারতীয় সুন্দরবন অংশে প্রায় 50 লক্ষ মানুষ এবং বাংলাদেশ অংশে 30 লক্ষ মানুষের বসতি সহ যে ম্যানগ্রোভ অরণ্য, তার সমস্তটা জুড়েই সুন্দরবন। আমি কথা বলবো ভারতীয় সুন্দরবন অঞ্চল নিয়ে। রুশাদ।
People's lives are at stake because of nature and wildlife in a forest. Sundarban is not only the hub of mangrove forest, but is the residence for 5 million people in India and 3 million people of Bangladesh. We are mainly talking about the India portion of Sundarban.
সব মিলিয়ে ভারতীয় সুন্দরবন অঞ্চল ৯৬৩০ বর্গ কিলোমিটার জুড়ে, যেটা সুন্দরবন বায়োস্ফিয়ার রিজার্ভ, যার মধ্যে জঙ্গল ৪২৬৪ বর্গ কিলোমিটার, জনবসতি অঞ্চল ৫৩৬৬ বর্গ কিলোমিটার, মোট দ্বীপের সংখ্যা ১০২, যার মধ্যে জনবসতি আছে ৫৪টা দ্বীপে, জঙ্গল আছে ৪৮টা দ্বীপে। উত্তর এবং দক্ষিণ ২৪ পরগনা দুটো জেলা জুড়ে রয়েছে সুন্দরবন, যার মধ্যে সাব ডিভিশন ৫টা, ব্লক ১৯টা, থানা ১৫টা এবং কোস্টাল থানা ৪টে।
Total area of Sundarban is around 9630 square kilometer, which is covering of 4264 is the only forest area. But the total number of islands of Sundarban is 102, but only 54 islands can be taken as a residence. Other than that, Sundarban area is in the 2 districts of West Bengal, which is in North 24 Parganas and South 24 Parganas. It's having 5 division, 19 blocks, and 15 police station, 4 coastal stations.
কোস্টাল পুলিশ স্টেশন। এই সুন্দরবনের বিপন্নতা অন্যান্য কোস্টাল অঞ্চলের থেকে বেশি। তার কারণ এটা একটা বদ্বীপ অঞ্চল এবং এর জনপদের জমির উচ্চতা খুবই কম এবং সেটা সমুদ্র তল থেকে 2 থেকে 3 মিটার বা কোথাও কোথাও 5-7 মিটার পর্যন্ত উঁচু। জোয়ারের সময় নদীর জল জনপদের জমির যে লেভেলে থাকে তার থেকে অনেক উঁচু দিয়ে বয়ে চলে। মাটির নদী বাঁধ দিয়ে নদীর জলকে নদীর মধ্যেই আটকে রাখা হয়। কাজেই ভঙ্গুর সেই নদী বাঁধ ভেঙে নদীর নোনা জল ঢুকে পড়ে ঘর বাড়ি বা ফসল নষ্ট হওয়া সুন্দরবনবাসীদের কাছে নতুন কিছু নয়। ঝড় ঝঞ্ঝা আগেও হতো, নদী বাঁধ আগেও ভাঙতো, কিন্তু বাড়তি বিপন্নতা এলো কোথা থেকে?
Sundarban is more vulnerable than any other coastal areas in the country as well as other areas, whereas where the height of the land is around 2 to 5 in some places and from 5 to 7 meters from sea level in few areas. It is mainly seen that embankments are made of muds and thus they erode much faster with the river as well as sea water.
ছোটবেলা থেকে দেখেছি আগেও সাইক্লোন ঝড় হতো, তার তীব্রতা থাকতো অনেক কম আর তা অনেকটা অল্প জায়গার উপর দিয়ে যেত, অল্প সময় স্থায়ী হতো। তখন ঝড়ের গতিবেগ 70 বা 80 বা 100 কিলোমিটার পার ঘন্টা হতো। এখন সাইক্লোনের তীব্রতা অনেক বেড়েছে। এখন ঝড়ের গতিবেগ 150 বা কোথাও কোথাও 200-250 প্রতি ঘন্টায় কিলোমিটার বেগে প্রতি ঘন্টায় হচ্ছে, স্থায়ী হচ্ছে দীর্ঘ সময় ধরে, আর তা বয়ে যাচ্ছে গোটা সুন্দরবন অঞ্চল জুড়ে, ফলে ক্ষয়ক্ষতি হচ্ছে বিপুল পরিমাণ।
Since childhood, we have hardly saw cyclones in Sundarban, and their speed used to be only of around 70 to 80 km/h, and it is usually used to affect small area. But now scenarios have changed. Number of cyclones have increased along with their velocity. Presently, speed of cyclones are between 150 to 250 km/h, and their impacts are on large areas. So amount of economic loss is huge.
সুন্দরবনবাসীদের প্রথম নাড়িয়ে দিয়েছিল 1988 সালের 30শে নভেম্বর পশ্চিমবঙ্গের সুন্দরবন অঞ্চল ও বাংলাদেশকে একটি ঘূর্ণিঝড় একবার বিধ্বস্ত করে দেয়। তখনও ঘূর্ণিঝড়ের নামকরণ শুরু হয়নি। সেই ঝড়ে পশ্চিমবঙ্গ এবং বাংলাদেশ মিলে মোট 6240 জন মানুষ মারা যান। এর মধ্যে বাংলাদেশের 5708 জন মানুষ এবং পশ্চিমবঙ্গের সুন্দরবন অঞ্চলের 538 জন। সুন্দরবনের জঙ্গলের মধ্যে সে সময় একটি পাখিরালয় ছিল সৈন্যখালী রেঞ্জের মধ্যে, সেইটা একেবারে ধ্বংস হয়ে যায়। এরপর পাখিরা আর কখনো সেখানে ফিরে আসেনি।
The first destructive cyclone was on 30th November 1988, which hit Sundarban area of both India and Bangladesh. That time cyclones usually didn't have names. Due to that cyclone, total number of 6240 people died in Bangladesh and in West Bengal. And West Bengal, we have seen, in Bangladesh, we have seen 5708 number of deaths, and in West Bengal, it's around 538 deaths. In Shojnekhali region, there was a bath sanctuary which got completely destroyed because of the cyclone. As it was the first most destructive cyclone, people couldn't know the amount of economic loss, but huge livestock and agriculture got smashed due to cause of cyclone.
সেবার দ্বীপে দ্বীপে বেশিরভাগ বড় বড় গাছ, কাঁচা বাড়ি আর অস্তিত্ব ছিল না। গবাদি পশু, গরু, ছাগল, হাঁস, মুরগি, কুকুর, বেড়াল মারা গিয়েছিল, যে ফেলার জায়গা ছিল না, এত পরিমাণে মারা গিয়েছিল। নদী দিয়ে দীর্ঘদিন ধরে ভেসে যেত গবাদি পশুর সারি সারি মৃতদেহের সঙ্গে মানুষের লাশ। এরপর ছোটখাটো ঘূর্ণিঝড়, বন্যা, নদী ভাঙন উপেক্ষা করা গেলেও 2009 সালের 25শে মে ঘূর্ণিঝড় আয়লা সমস্ত সুন্দরবন অঞ্চলের বেশিরভাগ দ্বীপকে প্রায় ভাসিয়ে দিল, ডুবিয়ে দিল। সমস্ত কাঁচা বাড়ি সম্পূর্ণরূপে ধ্বংস হয়ে গেল আবার। আর নদী বাঁধ, সে কথা আর নাইবা বলাই ভালো। বহু বহু জায়গাতে নদী বাঁধের আর অস্তিত্বই থাকলো না। বেশিরভাগ দ্বীপেই দীর্ঘদিন ধরে গ্রামের মধ্যেই জোয়ার ভাটা খেলতে লাগলো। সেই নদী কোনো রকমে বেঁধে অস্থায়ীভাবে মেরামত করে নদীর জল গ্রামের মধ্যে ঢোকা বন্ধ করতেই লেগে গেল দীর্ঘদিন। এর ফলশ্রুতি হলো মারাত্মক। বাড়ি ঘর, গবাদি পশু সবই তো গেলই, উপরই পাওনা হলো দীর্ঘদিন নোনা জলে দ্বীপের অভ্যন্তরে ঢুকে যাওয়াতে জমি আর চাষযোগ্য থাকলো না, মাটি হয়ে গেল নোনা। সেই জমি আর ধান চাষের যোগ্যই থাকলো না। ফলে সেই বছর চাষ তো হলোই না, আর মাটির সেই লবণাক্ততা কাটতে লেগে গেল আরো 2-3 বছর। শুধু এবার মানুষের প্রাণহানি কম হলো, কারণ ঘূর্ণিঝড় আয়লা সুন্দরবনের উপর আঘাত হানে দিনের বেলা, রাতের বেলা হলে বহু মানুষ মারা যেত।
Though after that main cyclone, numerous cyclones hit Sundarban, but most noted one was Ayla, which came on 25th May 2009, which drowned most of the Sundarban. All the mud houses in the villages got destroyed, and the embankments, which was mainly made of muds, got swept by seawater, and seawater ended up in the agricultural field, and the soil turned saline. Thus, crop got destroyed, but the salination of the soil prevails in the next years also.
এরপরও একের পর এক ঘূর্ণিঝড় আসে পড়েছে সুন্দরবনের বুকে। যেটা সবচেয়ে চিন্তার বিষয় তা হলো পরপর দুটো ঘূর্ণিঝড়ের মধ্যে সময়ের যে ব্যবধান ছিল সেটা অনেক কমে এসেছে। যেমন ধরুন 1988 ঘূর্ণিঝড়ের পর 2009 সালের ঘূর্ণিঝড় আয়লা, আর এখন প্রতি বছর একটা দুটো ঘূর্ণিঝড় তো লেগেই আছে। যেমন ধরুন 2014 সালের 14ই অক্টোবর ঘূর্ণিঝড় হুদহুদ, 2019 সালের 5ই মে ঘূর্ণিঝড় ফণী, ওই একই বছর 2019 সালের 12ই নভেম্বর ঘূর্ণিঝড় বুলবুল, 2020 সালের 21শে মে ঘূর্ণিঝড় আমফান, এবং গত বছর 2021 সালের 24শে মে ঘূর্ণিঝড় ইয়াস।
After 2009, many cyclones came, but the frequency got increased. Previously, we have seen that the frequency was between, most destructive cyclone was between 1988 and 2009. The frequency was huge. But now the frequency got increased. Like we can give some examples like 2014 Hudhud, 2019 Fani and Bulbul, 2020 Amphan, 2021 Yash. Both intensity and destructive capacity has also increased in these cyclones.
এর থেকে পরিত্রাণের উপায় কি? দেখুন, ঝড় ঝঞ্ঝা, সাইক্লোন, জলোচ্ছ্বাস এগুলো তো আমরা বন্ধ করতে পারবো না। গ্লোবাল ওয়ার্মিং এর ফলে হিমবাহ গলে গিয়ে সমুদ্রের জলস্তর বাড়া বা সমুদ্রের জলের উষ্ণতার তারতম্যের ফলে সৃষ্টি হওয়া ঘূর্ণিঝড় কোনোটাই বন্ধ করা আমাদের হাতে নেই। উপরন্তু একটি তথ্য বলছে সারা ভারতে সমুদ্রের জলস্তর যে হারে বৃদ্ধি পাচ্ছে তার মধ্যে বৃদ্ধির হার সবচেয়ে বেশি এই সুন্দরবন অঞ্চল। তাহলে বাঁচবো কিভাবে?
What can be the solution from effects of cyclones? Cyclones are natural hazards and that cannot be stopped with it. Due to global warming, the sea level is rising by melting glaciers, and the difference in the sea temperature is the reason of creating cyclones. And the way the sea level is rising, it will soon affect large portion of Sundarban. Then how coping capacity can be increased and lives can be lived with these hazards?
একমাত্র উপযুক্ত সরকারি পরিকল্পনাই আমাদের বাঁচাতে পারে। প্রথমত সুন্দরবনের যে কোনো সমস্যার সমাধান সুন্দরবনে রেখেই করতে হবে। এই 50 লাখ মানুষকে অন্যত্র সরিয়ে নিয়ে গিয়ে এই সমস্যার সমাধান হবে না, সেটা সম্ভব নয়। বিপন্ন সুন্দরবনের মানুষজনের জীবন জীবিকা সবটাই এই ইকোসিস্টেমের উপর নির্ভরশীল। সে চাষবাস হোক কিংবা ভেড়িতে বা পুকুরে নোনা জলে বা মিষ্টি জলে মাছ কাঁকড়া চাষ হোক, বা নদীতে অথবা জঙ্গলে মাছ কাঁকড়া ধরা হোক, বা সুন্দরবনের জঙ্গল থেকে মধু সংগ্রহ করাই হোক, তাদের জীবন জীবিকা গোটা পদ্ধতিটাই এই ইকোসিস্টেমটার সঙ্গে ভীষণভাবে যুক্ত। এটা মেনে নিয়েই পরিকল্পনাটা করতে হবে। রুশাদ,
Only proper plans from government can save the people of Sundarban. Migrating 5 million of people from Sundarban cannot be the solution. Moving people from their own habitat to other habitat cannot be accepted, and that will destroy the whole ecosystem.
প্রথমে বলতে চাই শক্তপোক্ত নদী বাঁধ ব্রিটিশ আমলে সুন্দরবনে নদী বাঁধের পরিমাণ ছিল 3500 কিলোমিটার মতো। বর্তমানে সেই পরিমাণ নেই। আয়লা পরবর্তী সময়ে তৎকালীন সরকার 3000 কিলোমিটার নদী বাঁধের শক্তপোক্ত করার পরিকল্পনা গ্রহণ করেন। কেন্দ্রীয় সরকার বরাদ্দ করেন 5032 কোটি টাকা, কিন্তু সেই পরিকল্পনা অনুযায়ী কাজ হয়েছে অতি নগণ্য, কমবেশি 100 কিলোমিটারের কাছাকাছি। কিন্তু যেখানে যেখানে ওই বিশেষ নদী বাঁধ হয়েছে, যাকে আয়লা বাঁধ বলা হয়, সেই সব রাস্তা ক্ষতিগ্রস্ত হয়েছে কম। চাই ওই ধরনের শক্তপোক্ত নদী বাঁধ এবং তার নদীর দিকে উপযুক্ত পরিমাণ চর। আর নদী বাঁধ এই মুহূর্তে 3000 কিলোমিটার হওয়ার দরকার নেই। এতদিনে সুন্দরবনের মানুষ ও সরকার সকলেই জানেন সবচেয়ে ক্ষতিগ্রস্ত হয় কোন কোন অঞ্চল। একটি পরিসংখ্যান বলছে সবচেয়ে খারাপ বা মোস্ট ভালনারেবল নদী বাঁধের পরিমাণ হচ্ছে 778 কিলোমিটার, বা মোটামুটি ধরে নিন 800 কিলোমিটারের মতো। এর মধ্যে মোটামুটি 100 কিলোমিটারের মতো নদী বাঁধ হয়ে গেছে। বাকি 700 কিলোমিটারের মতো নদী বাঁধের কাজ এই আয়লা বাঁধের মতো হলে সুন্দরবনের মানুষ অনেকটা সুরক্ষিত হবে। রুশাদ,
Firstly, there is a need of strong embankments. Britishers covered at around 3,500 kilometers of embankments, but after Ayla, government thought of 3,000 kilometers of embankment for which from central government people have got around local government have got around 5,032 crores, but the local government couldn't cover the designated area. Only 100 kilometers got covered at that time, and that embankments were named as Ayla embankments, which are very strong and have the capacity to handle cyclones. Such kind of embankments are required for the total Sundarban, which is presently at around 800 kilometers, as lot of Sundarbans got destroyed, and 800 kilometer is the most vulnerable area.
আর এই নদী বাঁধের দুপাশেই ম্যানগ্রোভের প্রাচীর তৈরি করতে হবে, যাতে নদীর ভাঙন রোধ হয়, নদীর চর শক্ত থাকে এবং জলোচ্ছ্বাসের প্রথম ধাক্কা সামলাতে পারে।
Mangroves need to be planted beside these embankments, which can protect land from erosion and also protect land from entering the sea water.
দ্বীপের ভেতরে সমস্ত রাস্তায় উঁচু, পাকা ও বড় করতে হবে, যাতে দ্বীপের একটা অংশে জল ঢুকে পড়লেও অন্য অংশে তা দ্রুত ঢুকে পড়তে না পারে।
Roads need to be changed from the what is present situation. They need to be higher from the in their heights, so that the water shouldn't get stuck in the roadways, and the transport shouldn't get destroyed.
নেক্সট পয়েন্ট, দ্বীপের ভেতরে জল নিকাশি যে খাল বা ক্যানেল আছে, সেগুলোর অধিকাংশ মজে গেছে, যেগুলো সংস্কার করা প্রয়োজন, যাতে নদীর ভেঙে জল ঢুকলেও সেই জল দ্রুত ওই ক্যানেল দিয়ে বেরিয়ে যেতে পারে।
Most of the canals in the island got blocked because of silt deposit and that need to be cleaned for clear drainage during the cyclone and heavy rain.
নেক্সট পয়েন্ট, সুন্দরবনের প্রতিটি অঞ্চলে সরকারি পয়সায় যে ঘর হচ্ছে সরকারি বিভিন্ন প্রজেক্টে, সেই বরাদ্দ আরো বাড়িয়ে প্রতিটি বাড়িতে যাতে অন্তত একটি করে কংক্রিটের ছাদযুক্ত ঘর থাকে তার ব্যবস্থা করতে হবে, যাতে সাইক্লোন এলে সেখানে মানুষ আশ্রয় নিতে পারে, বা বন্যা বা জলোচ্ছ্বাসে অন্তত তার ছাদের উপরে থাকতে পারে।
Government need to spend more money for the people of Sundarban so that each and every family get concrete house and that can help them to save their lives from cyclones.
নেক্সট পয়েন্ট, প্রতিটা অঞ্চলে সরকার যে সাইক্লোন সেন্টার তৈরি করছে তার সংখ্যা আরো বাড়াতে হবে, সেটা প্রয়োজনের তুলনায় অনেকটা কম। রুশাতি,
Need to increase the number of cyclone centers that government is making in Sundarban area.
আর চাই উপযুক্ত অর্থনৈতিক পরিকল্পনা। আয়লা এবং তার পরবর্তী সময়ে সুন্দরবনের বহু মানুষ বাধ্য হয়ে জীবিকার সন্ধানে অন্য রাজ্যে পাড়ি দিতে শুরু করেন, যা এখন ক্রমশ আরো বাড়ছে। কারণ বছর বছর ঘূর্ণিঝড় বা নদী বাঁধ ভেঙে তারা যে আর্থিক ক্ষতির সম্মুখীন হচ্ছেন তা সামলানোর মতো উপযুক্ত কর্মসংস্থান এই সুন্দরবন অঞ্চলে আর হচ্ছে না। কাজেই মানুষ বাধ্য হয়ে আন্দামান, কেরল, তামিলনাড়ু, কর্ণাটক বিভিন্ন রাজ্যে পাড়ি দিচ্ছেন কাজের সন্ধানে। এর থেকেও পরিত্রাণের উপায় কি? রুশাত,
Economic development, like developing jobs for people, is must for the future of Sundarban. After Ayla, cause of huge economic loss and decrease of productivity of land, people started migrating to other states for search of jobs. Less productivity in agriculture forces people to move to Kerala, Andaman, Tamil Nadu, Karnataka, etc. To get rid of this migration, communities have some recommendations or their thoughts.
Thank you, Mr. Tapas. I think we ran out of time, so we might probably have to wrap up soon.
একটা দুটো পয়েন্ট বাকি আছে, রুশাতি একটু ট্রান্সলেট করো।
He's only having 1 or 2 points left, so he just want to share the recommendation portion.
Oh yeah, sure. Then we can quickly wrap and bring that to the discussion session. Thank you so much.
রুশাতি বলবো?
They want to bring it in the discussion session. So আপনি এখন না বলে ওটা পরে তাহলে বলে দিন।
Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much. Thank you. So without further ado, we'll bring it to the next speaker who is looking at we are going to do a video screening on an Indian nomadic people first. So please put the video on from the organizer's side because we are having this video screening now.
Sure.
Thank you.
Thank you.
बाकीची अशी म्हणजे हीच घरं म्हणायची, शेती हेच म्हणायचे त्यांच्या थोडक्यात उदाहरणार्थ. म्हणजे 12 महिने आम्हाला हे असं फिरायचं आणि असंच राहायचं. नाही नेहमी म्हणजे काय झालं त्या दिवसच्या पावसामध्ये ना गारले होत. त्या गारला म्हणजे काय लागतं की आपण कसं बहुत थंडी लागली की आपण जर्किन घालतो किंवा काहीतरी एखाद्याने वरच्या आडुशाला उभा राहतो म्हणजे आपल्याला थंडी लागत नाही. तसं यांना म्हणजे कुठलं आधारच नव्हता त्यावेळेस.
आवशीपासून संध्याकाळपर्यंत दिवसा पाऊस पडून गेला त्यांनी काय होत नाही, पण रात्रभर पाऊस असला ना की ह्या शेळ्या मेंढ्याला त्रास होतो, कारण त्याला निवारा नाही इथं बाहेर परवेशाला असल्यावर. गावी निवारा असतात, त्यात 9-10 बकऱ्याला असा फटका बसला, बारकी पिल्ले बी बारकी त्यांची गेली 4-2. नाही पण ते कसं होतं हे आता पाऊस म्हणजे असा दर वर्ष नव्हता का ती पडत ह्या डिसेंबर महिन्यात, या चालू वर्षातच जास्ती झाला इकडं. नाही तर
बाकीची अशी म्हणजे हीच घरं म्हणायची शेती हेच म्हणायचे त्यांच्या थोडक्यात उदाहरणार्थ म्हणजे 12 महिने आम्हाला हे असं फिरायचं ना असंच राहायचं नाही नेहमी म्हणजे काय झालं त्या दिवसच्या पावसामध्ये ना गार लय होत त्या गारला म्हणजे काय लागत की आपण कसं बहुत थंडी लागली की आपण जर्किन घालतो किंवा काहीतरी एखाद्याने वरच्या आडुशाला उभा राहतो म्हणजे आपल्याला थंडी लागत नाही तसं यांना म्हणजे कुठलं आधारच नव्हता त्यावेळेस
आवशीपासून संध्याकाळपर्यंत दिवसा पाऊस पडून गेला त्यांनी काय होत नाही पण रात्रभर पाऊस असला ना की मी ह्या शेळ्या मेंढ्याला त्रास होतो कारण त्याला निवारा नाही इथं बाहेर परवेशाला असल्यावर गावी निवारा असतात त्यात 9-10 बकऱ्याला असा फटका बसला बारकी पिल्ले बी बारकी त्यांची गेली 4-2 नाही पण ते कसं होतं हे आता पाऊस म्हणजे असा दरवर्षी नव्हता का ती पडत ह्या डिसेंबर महिन्यात या चालू वर्षातच जास्ती झाला इकडे नाही तर डिसेंबर म्हणजे रायगड म्हणजे पाऊस गावात पडला नव्हता तिकडे पुण्या बिण्या साईडला गाराबिराचा पाऊस पडायचा कधीतरी चुकून बिकून अवकाळून याचा तर ह्या वर्षी पहिल्यानीच वेळ ही पावसाची होती इतका पाऊस पडण्याची कोकणामध्ये जास्त आम्हाला म्हणजे उष्णतेचा भाग असल्यामुळं कधी काय बिंद्र आमची खराचली नव्हती म्हणजे चालू वर्षातच हे वातावरण असं झालं काय त्याला विलाजच नाही ना काय करणार गेले तरी काही सरकार बी जर कुठं सांगितलं तर मनाव घेत नाही काय नाही शेशान त्याच्यामुळं ते नुकसान होते ते आपल्या शेतकऱ्यालाच भोगावं लागते त्याची सरकारने थोडी मदत करायला पाहिजे असते याला ते सरकार काय मनाव घेत नाही नाही व्यवसाय हे चाललाच पाहिजे ना ह्या व्यवसाय कसा शेळ्या मेंढ्याचा व्यवसाय हे पिढ्यानपिढी चाललाच पाहिजे कारण कसं आहे आमच्या म्हणजे काही मुलं शिकणारी नसतात काय नसतात त्याच्यामुळे नोकरी चाकऱ्या नाही त्याच्यामुळे ह्याच्यावर निर्वाह व्हायला जातो
आता आम्हाला असं वाटतं की हा व्यवसाय कमी करून शनी काहीतरी दुसरा व्यवसाय काढावा म्हणजे मुलं शिकून शनी पण ते विषय असा की आता जी काही पहिली मेंढ्यांमध्ये ती बोलू शकत नाही त्यांना दुसरं साधणारच नाही म्हणजे आम्हाला वाटत नाही की हेच करावं सारखं सारखं हेच करावं असं वाटत नाही आता पण आता नाविलाजाने करावं लागतं
Thank you very much for the sharing of the video screening. So we will quickly look back at looking at the advocacy activities, advocacy action from Vanuatu's International Court of Justice initiative to protect the rights of present and future generations, where an advisory opinion from the ICJ is sought or planned to be sought, and the presentation will be done by Lagi from Regional Policy Coordinator, Pacific Island, Ken. Lagi, the floor is yours.
Thank you. I hope you can see my screen.
Yes, we
good
can.
evening. Yeah, Bulavinaka, good evening and good afternoon to everyone, and thank you for this opportunity to share about the advisory opinion campaign, the campaign to seek an advisory opinion from the International Court of Justice that really the Pacific is leading, and we are looking to civil society organizations and other key non-state stakeholders and as well as state parties to the UN General Assembly to come behind and support this year. So I'm just going to go through my slides, and I want to provide a bit of a, I'm not sure if that has changed. Okay. I wanted to provide a bit about the context. So in 2018, our Pacific Island leaders came together to reaffirm that climate change remains to be the single greatest threat to the livelihood, security, and well-being of the the people and the communities in the Pacific. We know that the Paris Agreement, we are still off track to meeting the 1.5 degrees limit that's necessary and essential for Pacific Island people and communities to survive. We are seeing that we're now moving into a era of loss and damage, and communities who really have contributed little to nothing, very negligible contribution to the climate crisis are at the forefront. And one of the things is that for many in the developed North countries, that they still haven't been able to internalize the loss and damage, whereas here in the Pacific, we are seeing and experiencing loss and damage, but also how human rights are being violated as a result of the climate crisis. The establishment of the Special Rapporteur on Protection and Promotion of Human Rights in the context of climate change was a welcome development that will see, the role offering and having discussions on how we can bridge the link between human rights and climate change. We know that the 2030 on sustainable development, we just have a few years left to achieve SDG 13 on climate action, and we're really still off track in meeting that meeting that particular SDG goal. The 6 assessment reports of the Ipcc that were released, the working group 1, the working group 2, as well as the working group 3 reports are heart-wrenching and damning for the Pacific, small island nations, and also for for many other communities in different parts of our world today. And it's really a time for us to realize that if we do not explore other available options and means, we'll be left in a state where communities will further be pushed to the front lines of the climate crisis, and having to bear the burden of something that they didn't cause in the first place. So that's really about some of the context, linking climate to human rights, but also to the experience of Pacific Island people that has prompted this work on seeking an advisory opinion from the International Court of Justice. And when you look at the climate crisis and the impact on human rights, at its core, it is a human and environmental rights crisis. Fundamental human rights of those least responsible for creating this crisis are being undermined. So with every tropical cyclone, category 5 tropical cyclones that we're experiencing in the Pacific that are becoming more frequent and also becoming more intense, we are seeing cases of, even mothers who are unable to deliver babies in hospitals. So they have to deliver babies either on the road or near, on the way to the hospitals, because hospitals have been damaged or have been, torn apart by the cyclone. When we look at in the context of the right to health, many young people in Fiji and also across the Pacific are facing, high levels of climate anxiety, that's bringing about more mental health issues and psychosocial, the need for more psychosocial support for these young people. They're losing jobs as industries close after disasters. They're forced to move away from their homes back to the communities. They lose their income. So there's a lot of mental health pressures on these young people, and also generally people in the Pacific. The right to equality and freedom to from discrimination is also one of those fundamental rights that's been violated, infringed. We see groups of marginalized and vulnerable groups within communities, people with disabilities, LGBTQI community, for instance, who have been blamed to have brought about these disasters, when really these climate-induced disasters that we're experiencing in the Pacific is a symptom of a system that favors the global north, big corporations who are emitting, and also not only emitting, but are digging up coal and fossil fuel, and still promoting profits before people and planet. The right to social security, you'd see there's a news article that's there that over 51,000 people had to lodge to make applications to the Fiji National Provident Fund. So this is a social security scheme. That was set up for people so that when they retire, they have something to fall back on. And so with every single disaster that we've been experiencing, especially here in Fiji, the government doesn't have the capacity to rebuild and rehabilitate and do recovery efforts to the scale that meet everyone's needs. And so people have been given this opportunity, this option to access their pension scheme. And as we continue to see more and more disasters, becoming more frequent and intense over the years, people will continue to withdraw from their social pension funds. By the time they retire, they really don't have anything to fall back on. Again, the rights for persons with disabilities, we've heard excuse me. We've heard heart-wrenching stories of people with disabilities who've been left behind and are not able to access evacuation centers during disasters because of the evacuation centers are not accessible to them, or for fear of, or just a fear of safety and protection. When you look at the protection and ownership of property and loan ownership, and sort of links to also cultural rights, many people in the Pacific are seeing, their land, which, they hold deep sentimental value, but also that cultural value that are going underwater. So you can see in one of those photos, that's a community here in Fiji where the graveyard of their forefathers is now lying, almost 10 meters out into the sea. So all these, infringement and violation of human rights has prompted the Pacific to take this, leadership of seeking an advisory opinion from the International Court of Justice. An advisory opinion basically is to clarify the principles of international law, and also, that would set global benchmarks for climate ambition and action in this particular campaign, in the context of this particular campaign, including by referencing obligations to protect human rights. An advisory opinion will not assign responsibility for climate loss and damage or result in compensation or reparations, and should not, excuse me, and should not be confused with the International Criminal Court or the International Tribunal for the Law of the Sea, or other international legal mechanisms. And the ICJ basically, the advisory opinion is basically it's being led by the Pacific with the aims to cement this consensus on the scientific evidence of climate change, but also to integrate areas of international law that are currently separate, such as the human rights law and environmental law. It will further embed the climate crisis in the framework of human rights under international and national law, reaffirming, that all people have the right to, to life, to liberty and security, the right to property, and to their cultural and social heritage, etc. So by strengthening these through an advisory opinion, strengthening a rights-based, perspective to the, it therefore strengthens the rights-based perspective to the Paris Agreement and all other future international agreements to address climate change. We hope that through the ICJAO, that countries are encouraged by international law to transition towards a sustainable economic model that moves away from, fossil fuels to renewable energy, regenerative, sources of energy, etc. We hope that these ICJAO as well, that civil society and people will utilize these authoritative from the ICJ as that sacred advice to hold their governments accountable to their duties and to also protect their citizens. So this is basically what's at the heart of what the Vanuatu government is seeking to do. And this is an initiative that was kickstarted by a young people-led organization, the Pacific Island Students Fighting for Climate Change, and has garnered the support of the Pacific Islands Climate Action Network. And as Hajeet had mentioned earlier, the Ken International Network has come to support this as well, and we'll be coordinating the global effort to mobilize a global community to rally behind this particular campaign. And so last year, the Vanuatu's Prime Minister had officially announced of Vanuatu's intention to bring a climate rights case to the International Court of Justice to clarify the obligation of states under international law to protect the rights of present and future generations against the adverse effects of climate change. We know that within the
we need to wrap up a little bit so that we can bring the discussion to the discussion session later.
Thank you. So we know that the UNFCCC has been dragging its feet, with some of the global, negotiations on some key issues that means life and death for the Pacific. And this is why we need to go to the International Court of Justice so that, they're able to respond to legal obligations. I'm going to move quickly through the slides and talk about what are some of the things that we as a global community can do in the lead up to the UNGA this year. And so one of which is lobbying our own governments to support the ICJAO when it comes to a vote in September. One country gets one vote. There's no way to water down the language. There's no way to get an outcome that's less ambitious, like in the UNFCCC. It's a simple yes or no. And if they don't vote for this particular resolution, then civil society, it's much easier for civil society to put pressure on their government, and also they have that responsibility to answer directly to their governments. Mobilization, the global campaign, which has started rolling out, and over the next few weeks and few months, you'll be seeing some toolkits and some messaging directive, so sort of guidelines coming out from Ken International and PCAN and others. Organizing workshop, we are planning to organize a global workshop and webinars on the ICJO so we can sensitize the global community so that so that they can really pick up and support and raise awareness about this campaign and generate public dialogues and opinions and increase public support or pressure on their own governments. I'll move quickly through, this is just messaging principles. The key principles that all messaging should be non-confrontational. This is what this is about. We focus on the positive and not so much on the negatives. We are building a global coalition to protect people and human rights from climate impacts. That this campaign is about what we can save, not what we are losing. The ICJO is an exciting opportunity to make the changes that's needed to save our planet now. And finally, it's grounded in fact. Be aware that ICJ is and is not an advisory opinion on climate litigation. This is about clarifying international law and setting global benchmarks for climate ambition and action. And this is very exciting. This is real. There will be a transparent and on-the-record vote by all UN member states in the General Assembly, so CSOs messages can be tailored to national and regional context, resulting in the sense of urgency, community, momentum, and positivity. And my last slide, in the lead at the UN General Assembly, we hope that civil society, including those in Southeast Asia, in Asia, who are at the front lines of the climate crisis, can organize on the ground targeted action that's targeted on their governments. There's putting out op-eds and opinions on newspapers and other forms of media, social media, to generate public discussion and pressure. That young people are also provided with media opportunities, because this really is about not only human rights, but also about intergenerational equity. There's a major diplomatic effort that's being led by the government of Vanuatu, but we know that the government of Vanuatu has limits to the countries that it can reach. So we're really counting on not only our networks and civil society, but others to reach out to these key decision makers, not only to sensitize them, but also to craft and amplify appealing messaging around the benefits of the ICJAO. And this is really where we need to get the grassroots networks and organizations to mobilize. This is where we can get the regional nodes of Kenya International to be super involved, civil society to put that pressure on individual governments and on regional blocs, so that come September at the UN General Assembly, we have 97 votes to pass the resolution. And I'm going to end there, and I'm happy to answer any question. Thank you.
Thank you, Lucky, for the presentation. We'll quickly move to Sashi Kiran, friend of Fiji, who will be talking on climate impacts on Fiji, a small island nation, and CSO's engagement with communities. Lagi, I'm sorry, Sashi, you have the floor now. Sashi? All right, Lucky, you will have to stop sharing so Shashi can share the slides. Thank you.
Shashi seems to have dropped off. I
think.
Right. We
So
can
I will
wait
pass.
a minute. Maybe
Okay, we'll wait a
joins.
minute for Sashi to come back.
So maybe while we're waiting, we can move to the discussion session and then come back. Yes.
Yes, please. So I'll pass the floor to you, Ipcc. Ipcc, sorry. Thank you.
Thank you so much. So we will move ahead with our discussion session, which will be facilitated by Ms. Rebecca Murphy. Becky is GNDR's policy lead, heading up policy and advocacy, membership engagement, and external communications for GNDR. Becky has spent over 10 years working as a resilience and disaster risk reduction technical advisor for humanitarian teams, including at ActionAid, ChristianAid, and CAFOD. Here, Becky has spent significant time working in humanitarian contexts across Africa, Asia, Central America, and Middle East, with a specific focus on community resilience building in protracted crisis contexts. Becky has also spent time working for King's College London's Centre for Research on Integrated Risk and Resilience, specializing in research on resilience and local leadership in humanitarian development peace nexus. Becky is currently co-chair and focal point of the UNDRR Stakeholder Engagement Mechanism, that is SEM, and NGO constituency. Over to you, Becky, for this session.
Thanks so much, Ipcc. I hope you can all hear me. It's nice to see you all, and thank you so much for sharing all of the presentations, information, learning, really rich discussion and really fantastic to see. So it's a pleasure to be part of this meeting. So the session that we're going to do now is really an opportunity for you all to share with us your open reflections, your thoughts, and your expectations towards COP27 on loss and damage and adaptation. We'd like to give you the chance to talk through what your key messages would be, what you'd like to bring to COP27, what contribution and actions you'll make, so your plans in the run-up, and what the opportunities are for CSOs to engage on climate advocacy towards COP27. So I believe Ipcc has a poll for interaction to share so that you can all input your initial thoughts and reflections. So Ipcc, I'll hand to you just to share to share that with everyone. And I can see Sashi has joined back again, so we'll loop back to your session if that's okay with you.
Right. Okay. So I'm just going to put it here on the chat. There is a link we want you to go to, which is ahaslides.com / and there's the code. So when you go to this, you're going to be able to see the presentation. The questions are there, and at the same time, we will be presenting it on the screens for you to see each of the questions. Okay.
Brilliant. Thanks very much
for you, Becky.
Thank you.
There you go.
Perfect. So yes, please do copy and paste the link that Ipcc has kindly popped in the chat box there, and it will take you directly to a few questions that we would like to get your reflections on. And this is really to try and get you thinking now and reflecting on what you've heard and what your plans are as we move into the lead up to COP27. So the first question that you'll see in that poll, in that link, is what are your, so CSOs, civil society organisations, expectations towards COP27 on loss and damage, including the adaptation conversation? So what are your expectations from your organisations, from your communities, from the work that you're doing? And we'll give you a couple of minutes just to work on that and to share your reflections. And I can see some of them coming in already, which is brilliant, some speedy work. So we have a few coming in. I've added one as well to spark some conversation and reflection. So we have the establishment of loss and damage finance facility, so a really important topic there. And that's come through twice, which is very important. And I've added my thoughts on making sure that community voice on the front line of risk has meaningful space at COP27. We can see better understanding and ownership of loss and damage at all levels, countries agreeing to dedicate budget for loss and damage, so really important calls for financing and budget to meaningfully take forward what we want to on loss and damage and adaptation. I'll give you a couple of minutes to continue to add in to that link. If anyone's having trouble with that, just let us know and we can try and talk you through it. Great, we've got something in the chat box as well. Feel free to pop it in the chat if you're having trouble accessing that particular link. So I've added that in for you. Okay, let's give everyone just 2 more minutes to have a little think. So I can see a couple more. So participant limited exceeded. So getting Global South countries to have a unified position, really important. Again, financial support for loss and damage. Brilliant. Okay, well, Ipsita, maybe we'll move to the next question, if that's okay. That's really great to see the key themes coming through. Please do feel to keep putting them in the chat box if you're having trouble accessing the link. So the next question that we'd like you to reflect on and feed back to us is, what key messages would you like to bring into COP27? So what are the key messages from your organisations, the communities you're working with, that you'd really like to champion in the COP27 space? And we'll give you a few minutes to reflect and to add in either to that link or in the chat box. So I can see the first one coming in already. So climate actions should be inclusive, really, really important. And then another in the chat box, so accessible facility for loss and damage being another important message. And another coming in on the chat box to include financial support for loss and damage, and the need to listen to those most vulnerable and develop practical solutions, really important. A couple more on the link. So a key message to global decision makers here: you're moving too slow. 1.5 is not a goal, but a catastrophe. Very good. And we've got the loss and damage climate finance facility added here as well. next one coming in is strengthen NDCs, so no false climate solutions, 1.5 to stay alive. It's powerful messaging. And another in the chat box, so Indigenous communities engagement in climate change, including prioritising women, an important message there. We'll give everyone 2 more minutes to add a few more of their key messages that they'd like to bring to COP. Another one coming in, so the need for immediate resources to protect lives and dignities. Absolutely. Another in the chat box, so gender budgeting should be included. Absolutely. Okay, I think the messages have stopped coming through. So thanks so much for that one. Let's move to the next. Thanks, Ipcc. So our next question to you, that you should see on that link, but also, of course, add into the chat box, is what contributions or actions will you make from now until the COP27? So what do you have on your plan, your agenda, in the lead up to COP27 to advance these advocacy messages? What are your plans? And we'll give you a few minutes again to add into that link or add into the chat box. So we've already got the first one coming in, which is brilliant. So there's someone who shared that they will be gathering information and evidence from the frontline to support advocacy messages. Really, really important and really welcomed. I think this is one of our biggest strengths as a network together, where we can do this and support each other and capture evidence to showcase at these global spaces. We have a couple more coming in. So someone has added collaboration with stakeholders to strengthen the position at COP27. So working with others, working on these key policy advocacy messages. And a third, that's ICJAO campaign to broaden climate thinking and action well beyond UNFCCC, so a longer term thinking. I can see another couple coming in, so consolidating policy positions, raise awareness, gather and document climate realities to support policy positions, bilaterals with state and non-state actors, holding dialogues and supporting regional and global climate campaigns. So that's a lot going on, which is fantastic to see. Another contribution is advocacy at the global and national level and actions at the local level. And then bring in more regional perspective and focus at the global level, which is very important. I can see a couple of messages coming in from the chat box. So CARE in Vietnam is an active member of NGO Climate Change Working Group in Vietnam that has a total of 300 organisations and is engaging with NDC and NAP implementation. And pre-COP dialogues with the Vietnam Ministry is really important. So that link between communities, CSOs and national governments ahead of the COP. I can see another in the chat box, strengthening community-led initiatives. Brilliant. We'll give 1 more minute on this question and we'll move on. So another contribution, a People's Assembly, Frontline Voices leading advocacy demands. So that's great. We'd love to hear more about that and how we can get involved and support. Brilliant. Well, Ipcc, maybe I'll ask in light of time to move to the next question. So I think this is our last question. So what are the opportunities that you are aware of, that you know about for CSO engagement in climate advocacy towards COP27? So what are the opportunities for CSO engagement that you know about so we can share with everyone? So I'll give you again a few minutes to add into that link or into the chat box any opportunities that you are aware of between now and November when COP27 is happening. So we can see a few coming in. So strengthening the human rights and climate change link, supporting ICJAO campaign. I think that might be an action, that was the previous question, but that's still great, very great to have. So we've got one opportunity, so the Pacific Climate Justice Summit, which is great. The We Want campaign, so supporting CAN International in that space. Brilliant. We'll give just a couple more minutes for you to have a think about what opportunities there might be for CSOs to engage. I can see another come in, so intermediary sessions before the COP consortium from campaigns, which is great. I believe GNDR will also be hosting a members briefing in the lead up to COP27, so that would be another key opportunity to collaborate. Okay, brilliant. I think the inputs have stopped coming in. So thank you so much for sharing your initial thoughts, reflections, plans, advocacy, messages. It's really great to start getting a feel for what you want to prioritise as we move into the lead up to the next COP. So I will hand back to Ipcc for the next session. I'm not sure if we're looping back again or opening to Q&A, but back to you.
Thank you, Becky. Thank you very much. So we don't have a lot of time. We are actually 6 minutes away from the time that we had scheduled to close the webinar. But maybe we can ask Shashi if you would like to share maybe 1 or 2 key points, and then we will go into the closing. So we give you 2 minutes since you're here, and then we will move forward. Thank you.
Hi, thank you. Like I said, quite happy not to share because Langi did share some of the things. For us, I think it's been well known. Fiji has been one of the countries fighting. We've had one of the highest on average sea level rise that has been seen. And over time, we have seen man-made disasters. That is, we've had excessive mining, mining of gravels,
We have had excessive damage on mangroves, rubbish disposal. We see 1,000 vehicles coming in to a very small island nation per month. And all this waste are basically heading, and a lot of chemical fertilizers. So the damage to the ocean and the reefs has been an ongoing concern. With GNDR support, we've been working with modeling 15 communities. We've listened to the issues, and basically one of the key things that keeps coming out from the communities is that the incidences of cyclone and of course intensity has increased in the last few years. But also what we are seeing is poverty incidences, because people are not able to recover by the time the next one hits. So poverty has really increased in these areas. But we are also seeing, because of bad practices of mining and forest management and so on, we've had massive damages, and the poor management of floodgates by the government has saltwater intrusion as a major issue, and rubbish dumps are not allocated for rural areas, only the urban centers. So a lot of people are dumping the white goods in these water systems. So each flood, there's this increase in damage. Unfortunately, the evacuation centers that are used by the government are largely the schools run by committees, which are not cyclone proof or does not have engineer certificate. And we've had some school damages, and the people taking shelter at the evacuation centers damaged, being hurt as well. So we've been seeing this increasing damages, and governments are obviously not able to support and rehabilitate, and communities continue to suffer. While we are working with some of the communities in developing models, in developing seawalls which are more natural, trying to manage with vetiver grass and other root systems, the river banks, sustainable and organic farming, which I heard a few other people mentioning. So there's a lot of activity, and we're doing some trials with some of the communities on saltwater resistant crops for food security, because that's becoming a major issue as well. And some of the outer islands, because of the damages, there is not a lot of farmland or garden land left, and people are having to rely on mainland to get basic vegetables, which is again impacting the food security issue. Our malnutrition levels and non-communicable disease levels are pretty high. I had a presentation which I'm not putting up because it'll increase the length of a conversation, but I would just like probably to conclude by saying the people themselves are saying that the voices of the youth and the women have disappeared. Poverty has increased because of the capitalist moving in. We see much more damage to the environment by the corporates. And even though some of the Pacific governments, our government is one of them, which has had a very loud voice at a lot of global platforms, we are working with the local governments, and we have very good support at that level. We are working at different levels up to the next COP, trying our best that the governments start taking this seriously. And it's not just the voice at the global level, but they're actually implementing what we have all signed on, whether they are global frameworks, and then lots of national legislations and policies that are in place, but they're not actually monitored. For example, at the community level, we have Department of Environment, but they cannot monitor the gravel extractors because they don't have resource allocation. Or we see tourism sector damaging mangroves, but it's hard to manage because the Department of Environment does not have enough resources. So up to the next build-up, we are working on sideways with our civil society partners and universities. We're working with the communities, trying to see what sort of some of the good models, what sort of adaptation methods can be utilized. We're trying to lobby the government in ensuring that they are stable structures for evacuation and other things, so we minimize the death and human lives lost in each disaster that we've had. This year alone, where we are, we've had 5 to 6 floods just in the last few months. And while 10 years ago we used to have Cat 1 to 3, in the last decade we have seen higher frequency of tropical cyclones, but largely category 4 and category 5. So the impact on poverty, impact on structural damage, people's homes, and being a small developing country with budgetary issues, our people are basically getting poorer and poorer. And some of that has been mentioned by Langi and by the different speakers. So I'll pause there, and I'd be happy to share in future forums in due course. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Shashi. And we will now quickly move to the key takeaways from which will be shared by Adesu. Adesu is the regional lead for Africa and global risk driver lead on climate change at GNDR. He is also part of the board of directors of CAN International. So I welcome Adesu to please share the key takeaways from today's sessions.
Thank you so much, Ipcc, and good morning, everybody. It's a real pleasure to listen to all these insightful presentation. A lot has been said, and I can't summarize them in 2 minutes, but I just want to say we are under pressure, and there is a need to start very quickly acting and really acting in the field. So a lot has been shared. I just want to take some very important, some key points, key notes that I think are extremely important for the next step. As Hajeet has said it earlier, we have 3 years ahead to have a clear understanding on where the Glasgow dialogue is taking us to. But remember that in the Ipcc report, the working group 2, I think, of the Ipcc report, only 3 years are left for the human being to reverse the situation. So I think dedicating these 3 years to plan for the Glasgow dialogue is quite risky. And but I think this is something important to do. So while we'll be taking some concrete steps in the Glasgow dialogue planning, it's also important to start implementing activities in the field. It's also clear that the loss and damage remains a very critical topic at the COP, simply because the developed countries who are somehow responsible for the loss and damage because responsible climate change have no clear understanding of what developing countries mean by loss and damage. Therefore, it might be maybe interesting to scope a bit what we mean by loss and damage, just to clarify some points and to let people understand where we are taking them to. I believe once that understanding will be set, people will probably be more keen, be more committed to put resources in the loss and damage. And finally, as I said, it's important to advocate for resources, to push countries to understand that a very important part of this planet will disappear without money, without urgent resources for them. So we need to push these countries to understand the need and to really put the money on the table. Finally, I want to encourage all the local organizations who have done a great job here. I really like my e-travel to Malaysia today, where I see that nice city called Batam. I really want to continue to encourage all of us to continue acting in the field to change the situation, because the change will happen at global level when we change locally. So these are some of the key notes I'm taking. I will come back to the CAN colleagues to work on the scoping probably of loss and damage, and together we can have a clear map of the loss and damage. Thank you so much. And again, congratulations for the webinar. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Adesu. And this is the last bit we have of our webinar. And for the closing remarks, I would like to introduce Mr. Niti Nesadurai. He is the Director and Regional Coordinator at CAN Southeast Asia. At the national level, he is also the President of Environment Protection Society Malaysia, and he is actively participates in COP since 2000 and plays an active role in drafting statements of action for leading climate negotiators of ASEAN countries at COP. So Niti, over to you for closing remarks.
Thank you, Ipsita, for that introduction. We have had a day. We've had a very interesting webinar where we have been given rich sets of quality evidence-based presentations on loss and damage being faced by communities in Asia Pacific. They've been informative, they've been useful, they've been educational, and they've also been heartbreaking. Because, you know, people have suffered losses and damages. And the tragedy is that it's the weakest, the most marginalized, the powerless communities which suffer the most impacts, in spite of being the ones who have contributed least to the issue. It is heartening to see the positive response to the webinar, which was announced and held within a very short time frame. So it shows that there's a lot of interest in this topic. And we see this, we as in CAN and GNDR, as the first step of the discussion on loss and damage on the road towards COP27. So this in a way also answers one of the questions posed by Becky as what do we see ourselves doing? So we hope to see more of these engagements between both our organizations as we head towards COP27, and also see how this series of engagements, which we hope to do, integrate into the ongoing work of the Climate Action Network's working group on adaptation and loss and damage, as well as GNDR's own work in this area, you know, so that we all integrated and create synergy. With that, all that is left for me to do is to thank everyone, starting with the speakers, Hajeet, Celine, Tapas and Rushita, Lanagi, Sashi, and of course, Li Jing as moderators. You have all provided very good real life inputs, you know, and seeing is believing. As Adesu said, he got transported to the Baram region in Sarawak, you know. We've seen what's going on, including with the pastoral farmers in the video. Then I also would like to thank all you participants who have come and been with us, spared you know, your 2 hours of your very busy afternoon today to be with us, and the facilitators for each session. And finally, on behalf of Climate Action Network Southeast Asia, I'd like to thank GNDR for coming up coming to us and requesting to engage on this project, which we grabbed, we seized the opportunity, and I'm so glad we did. And also to CAN South Asia for coming in and also being a partner in this process. So with that, just like to once again thank everyone who was involved, who's been present. I think we've had a very beneficial and productive afternoon, and we will take this as a first step towards a process which will lead us to COP27, and in a manner in which we are fully prepared to engage when we get there and all along the way. So with that, thank you all, and I'll pass it back to Ipsita to close the meeting.
Thank you so much, Neeti. And I would like to thank everyone for joining us today. And we look forward to our continued engagement. Hope you have a great day ahead. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.